Rebecca Wilson, 32, never imagined her parents could betray her so completely. Standing in her kitchen, phone still clutched in her trembling hand, she stared at the text message that had just shattered her world: "Sell the house to Cassandra or consider yourself disowned." What her family didn't know was that her sister's CEO husband had already set events in motion that would expose their decades-long web of lies and manipulation. Before I dive into this wild family drama that turned my life upside down, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy family revenge stories where karma finally catches up. Trust me, what happened next in this nightmare will make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. Stick around to see how I discovered the truth behind my parents' ultimatum and the satisfying justice that followed. The house in question wasn't just any property. It was a charming 3-bedroom craftsman in one of Boston's most desirable neighborhoods, with original hardwood floors, a renovated kitchen, and a backyard garden that had been featured in local home magazines. It had belonged to my grandmother, Eliza Wilson, who had always been my closest confidant and supporter. When she passed away 6 months ago, her decision to leave the house to me instead of dividing it among all her grandchildren had caused immediate tension in the family. I never expected to inherit anything substantial. As the middle child and the only one who hadn't followed the family tradition of pursuing careers in medicine or law, I was used to being the outlier. While my older sister Cassandra became a renowned neurologist married to the CEO of a pharmaceutical company, and my younger brother Tyler graduated from Harvard Law, I chose to become an elementary school art teacher. My parents never hid their disappointment in what they called my lack of ambition, despite the fact that I loved my work and the difference I made in children's lives. Grandmother Eliza was different. She appreciated my passion for art and teaching, often telling me that success shouldn't be measured by salary or status. During the last years of her life, I visited her almost daily, helping with groceries, taking her to doctor appointments, and simply keeping her company. We would sit in her garden drinking tea while she shared stories of her youth and wisdom about life. These moments were precious to me, far more valuable than any inheritance. When the lawyer read grandmother's will, everyone was stunned to hear that she had left her house to me. To Rebecca, the will stated, who showed me the true meaning of family through her actions rather than her words. My parents and siblings sat in shocked silence, while I fought back tears, overwhelmed by this final gesture of love from my grandmother. The tension was palpable as we left the lawyer's office. My sister Cassandra, always composed and controlled, couldn't hide her displeasure. "I always assumed grandmother's house would go to all of us equally," she said, her voice tight. "After all, we're all family." My brother Tyler, ever the pragmatist, immediately started discussing tax implications and property values. "That house is worth at least $1.2 million in today's market. Rebecca, you should consider selling it and investing the money. It's not like you can afford the property taxes and maintenance on a teacher's salary." My parents remained unusually quiet during this discussion, but I could see the disappointment and calculation in their eyes. They had always favored my more successful siblings, and this inheritance disrupted the family hierarchy they had carefully cultivated for decades. In the weeks that followed, I moved into grandmother's house. It felt right to be there, surrounded by her books, her art, and the garden we had tended together. I converted one of the bedrooms into an art studio where I could work on projects for my students and my own creative endeavors. For the first time in my life, I felt truly at home and independent, free from the constant judgment of my achievement-oriented family. The peace didn't last long. The calls and visits began, subtle at first but growing increasingly aggressive. Cassandra would drop by unannounced, wandering through the rooms with a critical eye. "This place has so much potential," she would say. "David and I have been looking for a property in this neighborhood. Our realtor says homes here rarely come on the market." My parents started inviting me to dinner more often than they had in years, always steering the conversation toward the burden of maintaining such a large property. "We're just concerned about you, Rebecca," my mother would say. "This house has so many expenses. Wouldn't you be happier in a small apartment, with a nice investment portfolio from the sale?" Even my brother Tyler got involved, sending me listings for condos and calculating how much I could earn if I invested the proceeds from selling grandmother's house. "It's what grandmother would want," he insisted. "She wouldn't want you struggling to maintain this place." What none of them knew was that grandmother had thought of everything. Along with the house, she had set up a modest trust fund specifically for property taxes and maintenance costs. I wasn't struggling financially at all, but I kept this information to myself, increasingly suspicious of my family's motivations. The situation came to a head when I discovered that Cassandra and her husband David had already consulted with an interior designer about renovations to my house. I found the plans accidentally when Cassandra left her tablet open during one of her visits. There on the screen were detailed renderings of my grandmother's home, completely transformed to suit Cassandra and David's taste. The garden where grandmother and I had spent so many hours was replaced with a swimming pool. The cozy library was converted into a home gym. It was clear they had been planning this for months, absolutely certain they would eventually get their hands on the property. When I confronted Cassandra about the renovation plans, she didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. "Be realistic, Rebecca," she said. "You can't possibly want to stay in this outdated house forever. David and I are prepared to offer you a very generous price, well above market value. It makes sense for everyone." I was stunned by her audacity. "This isn't about money," I told her. "This is grandmother's home. She wanted me to have it." Cassandra's usually perfectly composed face twisted with an ugly expression. "You were always her favorite, weren't you? Always the special one, even though you've accomplished nothing compared to the rest of us. It's not fair, and it's not right." Her words stung, but they also revealed something I had always suspected but never fully acknowledged. My family resented the close relationship I had shared with grandmother. They saw her love for me as a judgment on them, a rejection of the values they held dear. As Cassandra stormed out, I realized this conflict was about much more than a house. It was about family dynamics that had been broken for years, perhaps decades. And something told me the situation was about to get much worse before it got better. The weeks following my confrontation with Cassandra brought an escalating campaign of pressure from my family. What had started as subtle suggestions evolved into outright demands. My parents, who had always been emotionally distant but at least respectful of my choices, now became aggressive advocates for selling the house to my sister. My father, a cardiothoracic surgeon known for his cool precision, called me daily with new arguments. "Your sister and David need this neighborhood for their professional image," he explained, as if that should matter to me. "The school district is perfect for the children they're planning to have. You don't even have kids, Rebecca. Be reasonable." My mother took a different approach, attempting to use guilt as leverage. "Your grandmother wouldn't want to cause this much discord in the family," she insisted during one particularly heated phone call. "She wasn't thinking clearly in her final months. You were there influencing her decisions." That accusation hurt more than anything else. The implication that I had somehow manipulated my elderly grandmother for personal gain was not only false but a cruel distortion of the loving relationship we had shared. I found myself crying after these conversations, questioning whether I was being selfish, wondering if I should just give in to keep the peace. Meanwhile, Cassandra and David escalated their tactics. David, as CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, was used to getting his way through a combination of charm and veiled threats. He invited me to lunch at an expensive restaurant, where he spent the first hour talking about his plans for expansion at Meridian before finally addressing the real reason for our meeting. "Rebecca," he said, swirling his wine glass with manicured fingers, "family is important to me. I want to resolve this situation in a way that benefits everyone." He slid a folder across the table. "This is our final offer. It's significantly above market value. You could buy any apartment you want, travel the world, maybe even open that art studio you've always talked about. I glanced at the figure, $1.5 million, before closing the folder. It's not about the money, David. This is my home now. His expression hardened slightly. I understand your attachment, but you need to think practically. Your position at Franklin Elementary isn't exactly secure, is it? The implication wasn't subtle. David was on the board of several major charitable foundations that provided substantial funding to Boston public schools, including Franklin Elementary where I taught. He was threatening my career. Are you saying you would use your influence to have me fired? I asked directly. David smiled, all perfect white teeth and cold eyes. Of course not. I'm simply pointing out that job security is important in today's economy. Teaching positions come and go. Family support is forever, if you make the right choices. I left that lunch feeling shaken but more determined than ever. I wouldn't be bullied out of my grandmother's home, not even by someone as powerful as David Coleman. That evening, I called my principal, Sarah Martinez, who had always been supportive of my work. Without going into specific details, I asked if my position for the coming school year was secure. Absolutely, Sarah assured me. In fact, we're considering expanding the art program based on the success you've had with integrating art therapy techniques. Why do you ask? I made an excuse about general anxiety, not wanting to drag her into my family drama, but her confirmation gave me some peace of mind. At least professionally, I was on solid ground. The next assault came from my brother Tyler. As a corporate attorney, he approached problems methodically, always looking for leverage. He showed up at my door one Saturday morning with a thick stack of papers. I've been doing some research, he announced, spreading documents across my kitchen table. There may be grounds to contest grandmother's will based on undue influence. She was in declining health when she made these changes, and you were her primary caregiver during that time. I stared at him in disbelief. Are you seriously suggesting we go to court over this? You want to drag our family through a legal battle and tarnish grandmother's memory? Tyler adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable but persistent. It wouldn't necessarily go to court. Just the threat of legal action might be enough to bring you to the negotiating table. Be reasonable, Rebecca. This house is wasted on you. Wasted on me? I repeated, my voice rising. Because I actually live in it and love it, instead of seeing it as a status symbol or investment property? Don't be dramatic, Tyler sighed. You're being selfish. The family needs. The family needs? I interrupted. Or Cassandra and David need? Since when did their wants become the entire family's priority? Tyler gathered his papers, his expression cold. You've always been difficult, Rebecca. Always thinking you're special because grandmother favored you. The rest of us have built successful lives while you play with finger paints. Maybe it's time you grew up and considered the greater good. After he left, I sat in grandmother's garden, trying to find calm among the roses and hydrangeas she had lovingly cultivated. The space had always brought me peace, but now it felt like the eye of a hurricane, a temporary respite before the next wave of family pressure hit. That evening, my phone pinged with a text message from my mother. Your father and I have discussed the situation. This has gone on long enough. Sell the house to Cassandra or consider yourself disowned. Family loyalty must work both ways. I read the message multiple times, each reading bringing fresh waves of hurt and anger. This was the ultimatum that would change everything, not just my relationship with my family, but my understanding of who they truly were and what they were capable of. What they didn't know was that their escalating tactics had pushed me to start investigating why they were so desperate for this particular house. Grandmother had left other assets to be divided among all her grandchildren. Why was this property so important to Cassandra and David? There had to be something more than neighborhood prestige or school districts driving their obsession. I remembered that David's pharmaceutical company, Meridian, had been in the news recently regarding a major expansion. On a hunch, I started researching their plans, wondering if there could be any connection to my grandmother's property or the surrounding area. What I discovered would turn the tables in ways none of them could have anticipated. Little did my family know, but their ultimatum had just triggered a series of events that would expose decades of secrets and lies. And David, the powerful CEO so used to getting his way, had already made a critical mistake that would soon come back to haunt them all. The morning after receiving my parents' ultimatum, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The hurt remained, a deep ache in my chest, but it was now accompanied by a cold determination. If my family wanted war over this house, I needed to understand exactly what we were fighting for. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and devoted the day to research. David's company, Meridian Pharmaceuticals, had indeed announced a major expansion of their research facilities. The press releases were vague about the location, mentioning only prime real estate in the greater Boston area. This wasn't unusual. Companies often kept specific details under wraps until all property acquisitions were finalized to prevent speculation and price gouging. What was unusual, however, was the timing. Meridian had announced their expansion plans just 3 weeks after my grandmother passed away. It could be coincidence, but my instincts told me there was more to the story. I decided to dig deeper into my grandmother's papers. She had been meticulously organized, keeping all important documents in a vintage secretary desk in her study. I had briefly gone through the most essential items after her death, her will, insurance policies, bank statements, but hadn't had the heart to do a thorough inventory of her personal papers. Hours into my search, I found a folder labeled Neighborhood Association. Inside were minutes from meetings, correspondence about local zoning issues, and newsletters spanning the last 5 years. Most of it seemed routine, discussions about tree maintenance, complaints about parking, updates on community events. Then I noticed a letter dated about 8 months before grandmother's death, addressed to all homeowners in the area. The letter, from the city planning department, notified residents that a developer had submitted an application to rezone several blocks for mixed commercial and residential use. The proposed development would include research facilities, office space, and luxury condominiums. The letter didn't name the developer but invited homeowners to attend a public hearing on the matter. Attached to the letter was a handwritten note in my grandmother's elegant script, "Called David about this. He says not to worry, Meridian has nothing to do with it." Seemed nervous. Something's not right. My heart began to race. David had known about potential development in this neighborhood before grandmother died. Had he lied to her? And if Meridian was indeed behind the rezoning application, why keep it secret from family? I needed more information. Searching online for news about rezoning in my neighborhood yielded nothing current, but I did find an article from 7 months ago mentioning that the rezoning application had been withdrawn after significant community opposition. The developer was not named in this article either. Next, I contacted Martin Reeves, my grandmother's friend who had served as president of the neighborhood association for over a decade. When I explained that I was trying to understand some of the issues grandmother had been involved with before her death, he immediately mentioned the rezoning battle. "Your grandmother was a force of nature during that fight," Martin told me over coffee at a local cafe. When we found out who was really behind the application, using a shell company called Boston Urban Development to hide their identity, she was particularly upset. "Who was it?" I asked, although I was beginning to suspect the answer. Martin lowered his voice. "Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Your brother-in-law's company." Eliza felt personally betrayed because apparently David had assured her they weren't involved. She confronted him at some family gathering, and from what she told me afterward, it got quite heated. This was the first I'd heard of any confrontation between grandmother and David. My family had a talent for keeping unpleasant incidents quiet, maintaining the facade of harmony at all costs. What happened with the rezoning application? I asked. It was withdrawn, but Eliza didn't trust that they'd given up. She did some investigating of her own and discovered that Meridian had been quietly buying properties in the neighborhood through various shell companies. She was convinced they were trying to assemble enough parcels to resubmit a modified plan that would be harder to oppose. Martin hesitated, then added, "The last time I saw Eliza, about 2 weeks before she passed, she mentioned changing her will. She said she needed to protect the neighborhood from vultures. I assumed she was donating to the association's legal defense fund, but perhaps." He didn't need to finish the thought. My grandmother had left me the house to prevent it from falling into Meridian's hands. She knew my sister and her husband would sell it to the company in an instant, probably at a premium, facilitating whatever development plans they had for the area. Armed with this new understanding, I spent the next several days piecing together more of the puzzle. Through public records, I confirmed that 3 properties on my street had indeed been sold to different LLCs within the past year. A friend who worked in real estate helped me trace these companies back to a holding corporation that, through several layers of ownership, connected to Meridian Pharmaceuticals. The picture was becoming clear. David's company needed a certain number of properties in this neighborhood to move forward with their development plans. My grandmother's house was likely a key parcel, possibly because of its central location or its size. When she discovered their scheme, she ensured the house would go to the one person in the family who wouldn't be easily bought off or pressured, me. What I still didn't understand was why my parents were so invested in this. Were they simply supporting Cassandra out of their usual favoritism, or was there something more? Had they known about Meridian's plans all along? The answer came from an unexpected source. While searching through more of grandmother's papers, I found a small, leather-bound journal tucked behind some books on her shelf. It was a diary she had kept during the last year of her life. Most entries were brief reflections on her day, notes about her garden, or observations about the changing seasons. But several entries stood out. March 15th, confronted David about the rezoning today. He denied everything until I showed him the documents Martin obtained. Then he admitted Meridian was involved but claimed it would benefit the neighborhood. When I pressed him about lying to family, he offered to make it worth my while if I supported the project. Insulting. April 2nd, Margaret and William came by today. Shocked to discover they already knew about Meridian's plans. William admitted David had offered them significant stock options in exchange for their support in convincing me to sell. My own son and his wife, conspiring behind my back. The betrayal runs deeper than I imagined. Margaret and William, my parents. They had known all along. David had bought their support with promises of financial gain, and they had chosen Cassandra's husband's business interests over their own mother's wishes. The final piece fell into place when I found an entry dated just 3 weeks before grandmother's death. May 10th. Meeting with Gerald tomorrow to change my will. The house must go to Rebecca. She alone has shown true character and won't be swayed by David's money or Margaret's manipulation. They'll pressure her, of course, perhaps even threaten to cut her off. But Rebecca has more strength than they recognize. And I'm leaving her something else, something they don't know about, that will protect her when the time comes. Something else? I had received the house and a modest trust fund for its maintenance, but nothing that would particularly protect me from my family's pressure. What had grandmother meant? The answer came to me suddenly: the safe. There was a small wall safe behind a painting in grandmother's bedroom. I had opened it shortly after moving in, finding only some jewelry and a few $100s in cash. I had assumed that was all it contained. Now, I examined the safe more carefully. The back panel seemed slightly loose. When I pressed on it, it slid aside, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written on it in grandmother's handwriting, along with a small USB drive. The envelope contained a letter explaining everything. Grandmother had suspected David's company was using unethical means to acquire properties in the neighborhood. She had hired a private investigator who documented evidence of pressure tactics, misleading statements to homeowners, and potentially illegal activities related to the shell companies Meridian had established. The USB drive contained copies of emails, financial records, and recorded conversations that not only proved David's deception but implicated my parents as willing participants in the scheme. There were also documents suggesting that Meridian had misrepresented environmental impact data in their rezoning application, a serious violation that could trigger regulatory investigations and significantly damage the company's reputation and stock value. Grandmother's letter concluded, "I hope you never need to use this information, Rebecca. Perhaps after my passing, your family will respect my wishes and your right to the home. But if they do not, if they push you to the breaking point, this evidence is your shield and, if necessary, your sword. Use it wisely, my dear. Sometimes justice requires a firm hand." As I sat in my grandmother's study, surrounded by the evidence of my family's betrayal, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The hurt remained, but it was overshadowed by a newfound sense of purpose. My grandmother had trusted me not just with her home, but with the truth. Now I had to decide what to do with it. I looked at my phone, rereading my mother's ultimatum: sell the house to Cassandra or consider yourself disowned. They had no idea what they were really asking for, or what I was now prepared to do. The power dynamic in our family was about to shift dramatically, and none of them, not my entitled sister, not her manipulative CEO husband, not even my compromised parents, were ready for what would come next. I spent a sleepless night contemplating my next move. The evidence grandmother had collected gave me significant leverage, but using it meant potentially destroying my relationship with my family forever. Despite their behavior, part of me still held on to the hope of reconciliation. Was exposing their schemes worth the permanent rift it would create? By morning, I had made my decision. I would confront them directly, one last chance for honesty before I took more drastic measures. I texted my parents, Cassandra, and David, inviting them to dinner at the house that evening. "We need to discuss the situation as a family," I wrote. "I think I've found a solution that might work for everyone." The responses came quickly. All would attend, no doubt assuming I was finally capitulating to their demands. I spent the day preparing. First, I made copies of all the evidence and secured them in multiple locations, including with my trusted friend Maya, who knew nothing specific about the situation but understood it was important. Then I reached out to my brother Tyler, who hadn't been mentioned in grandmother's journals. I needed to know where he stood before including him in the confrontation. We met for coffee, and I approached the subject carefully. "Tyler, what do you know about Meridian's interest in this neighborhood?" His expression flickered briefly before settling into practiced neutrality. "What do you mean?" "David's company is expanding, but I don't know the specifics." "Did you know they've been buying properties around grandmother's house through shell companies?" I pressed, watching his reaction closely. Tyler adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit from childhood. "Rebecca, business matters can be complicated. Companies often use discretion when acquiring real estate to prevent speculation." "That's not what I asked," I said quietly. "Did you know about Meridian's plans for this neighborhood before grandmother died? Have you been helping them with the legal aspects of these acquisitions?" His silence was answer enough. Finally, he sighed. "I provided some counsel on the regulatory framework. It's all perfectly legal, Rebecca. The development will revitalize the area, increase property values." "Did you know grandmother found out about it? That she left me the house specifically to block David's plans?" Tyler's eyes widened. That's not possible. How would she have known?" I decided to show one card from my hand. "She hired a private investigator. She knew everything, Tyler." About the shell companies, about David's pressure tactics with other homeowners, about the stock options he offered mom and dad. Look, Tyler said, leaning forward, whatever you think you know, it's more complicated. This development could mean millions for the family. We're talking about generational wealth. Your teaching job can't compete with that kind of security. So you chose money over grandmother's wishes? Over my autonomy? Don't be naive, he snapped. This is how the world works. Sometimes family means making strategic decisions together. Family means honesty and respect, I countered. None of you have shown me either. Tonight, I'm giving everyone one chance to come clean and find a real solution. You can either be part of that or not. Tyler studied me for a long moment. You've changed, Rebecca. You used to be the peacekeeper, the one who went along to get along. Maybe I've finally learned to stand up for myself, I replied. Will you be there tonight? He nodded slowly. I'll be there. But don't expect everyone to just abandon plans that have been in motion for years because you've found some moral high ground. As I prepared dinner that evening, I arranged the dining room carefully. At each place setting, I put a folder containing selected pieces of evidence relevant to each person's involvement. I kept grandmother's full documentation hidden but accessible. The stage was set for a confrontation years in the making. They arrived together, my parents and Cassandra arriving first, followed by Tyler, and finally David, who made a show of taking business calls on his way into the house. The initial conversation was strained with artificial pleasantries as I served drinks in the living room. The house looks lovely, Rebecca, my mother commented, eyes critically scanning the few changes I'd made to grandmother's decor. You've maintained it well. Yes, Cassandra added with a tight smile. It would be perfect for us with just a few updates. The location is ideal for David's commute to the new research facility. I noticed they were already speaking as if the transfer of ownership was a foregone conclusion. My father caught my eye and nodded encouragingly, clearly expecting me to announce my surrender over dinner. Shall we move to the dining room? I suggested, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. As everyone took their assigned seats, I remained standing at the head of the table, my grandmother's usual place. Before we eat, I want to address the reason I've called you all here, I began. Yesterday, I received an ultimatum from Mom and Dad: sell this house to Cassandra and David or be disowned from the family. David cleared his throat. Rebecca, that sounds so harsh when you put it that way. We're simply trying to find a solution that benefits everyone. Benefits everyone? I repeated. Or benefits Meridian Pharmaceuticals' plan to develop this neighborhood into a research campus and luxury condos? The silence that fell over the table was absolute. My mother recovered first. What on earth are you talking about? Please, I said, gesturing to the folders before them. Open these. I think they'll answer your questions. One by one, they opened their folders. My father's contained documents showing the stock options David had promised him in exchange for convincing grandmother to sell. My mother's held copies of emails she had sent to David, updating him on grandmother's health and suggesting times when she might be more amenable to financial discussions. Cassandra's folder revealed her knowledge of the shell companies and her role in identifying vulnerable homeowners in the neighborhood. Tyler's contained legal memos he had written regarding potential zoning challenges and strategies to overcome them. David's folder was the thickest: evidence of misrepresented environmental data, recordings of his conversations with city officials, documentation of the pressure tactics used against elderly homeowners. The reactions varied from shock to anger to calculated silence. Cassandra was the first to speak, her voice icy. Where did you get these? Grandmother knew everything, I said simply. She documented it all before she died. She left me the house specifically to prevent it from becoming part of Meridian's development. And she left me the evidence to protect myself when you inevitably tried to force me out. David's business facade cracked slightly as he flipped through his folder. These documents are proprietary. Taking them was illegal. Actually, I interrupted, the private investigator grandmother hired obtained them legally. And recording conversations in Massachusetts is perfectly legal as long as one party consents, which grandmother did when she recorded your offers to her. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You've been planning this ambush all along. While we were trying to help you make a sensible financial decision. Help me? I laughed incredulously. You threatened to disown me if I didn't comply with your demands. That's not help, Dad. That's coercion. My mother reached for her wine glass with a slightly trembling hand. Rebecca, you're blowing this out of proportion. Family businesses often involve complicated arrangements. This isn't about business, I cut in. This is about betrayal. You chose David's corporate interests over your own mother's dying wishes. You chose money over my autonomy and happiness. You lied, manipulated, and threatened me rather than being honest about what was really happening. Tyler, ever the attorney, was already thinking strategically. What exactly do you want, Rebecca? If this is a negotiation, state your terms. I took a deep breath. I want 3 things. First, I keep the house, permanently. No more pressure, no more manipulation. Second, Meridian abandons any plans to develop this neighborhood. Find another location for your research campus. Third, I want a public commitment from Meridian to establish a community trust that will preserve the character of this neighborhood and protect the remaining elderly residents from predatory buying practices. David's laugh was dismissive. You can't be serious. The company has already invested millions in this project. The board would never. The board might reconsider if they saw evidence that Meridian knowingly falsified environmental impact data, I countered. Or if regulators started investigating the web of shell companies you've established. Or if the press got hold of recordings showing how you pressured elderly homeowners. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. David's expression hardened. That sounds remarkably like blackmail. I prefer to think of it as accountability, I replied. Grandmother gave me these tools to protect myself, but I'd rather not use them destructively. I'm offering you a chance to make things right, to find an ethical path forward. Cassandra stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're holding a multi-million-dollar corporate development hostage over some misguided loyalty to a house. Do you have any idea how selfish that is? Selfish? I repeated, feeling a flash of anger break through my composed exterior. I spent years caring for grandmother while the rest of you were too busy to visit more than holidays. I honored her wishes while you all conspired behind her back. And I'm selfish? My mother attempted a conciliatory tone. Darling, we understand you were close to your grandmother. No one is disputing that. But surely there's a compromise. I've offered my compromise, I said firmly. The house stays with me, the development moves elsewhere, and Meridian establishes a community trust. Those are my terms. David stood, straightening his designer suit. This conversation is over. Rebecca, you've made a serious mistake. There are ways to handle family disagreements, and then there are ways that burn bridges permanently. You've chosen the latter. No, David, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. You chose this path when you decided to use my family to manipulate my grandmother, and then me. You have 24 hours to respond to my terms before I take this evidence to the appropriate authorities. Are you feeling the tension rising in this family showdown? The stakes have never been higher, and I'm finally standing up to years of manipulation. If you're invested in seeing how this confrontation plays out, hit that like button right now and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. I'd love to know if you've ever had to confront family members who betrayed your trust, Drop your experiences in the comments below while I continue with what happened after I dropped this bombshell on my family. One by one, they left, David first, followed by Cassandra, then my visibly shaken parents. Tyler lingered behind, studying me with a mixture of legal calculation and genuine surprise. "You've outplayed everyone," he said finally. "I didn't think you had it in you." "I learned from watching all of you," I replied. "The difference is, I'm using these skills to honor grandmother's wishes, not undermine them." Tyler nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think David will cave. There's too much at stake for Meridian. The quarterly earnings report is due next week, and even a hint of regulatory investigation would tank their stock price." He headed for the door, then paused. "You know this changes everything, right? The family will never be the same." "The family hasn't been what I thought it was for a long time," I answered. "Maybe it's time to build something more honest from the ruins." After everyone left, I sat alone in my grandmother's garden, emotionally exhausted but strangely peaceful. I had finally stood up for myself, honoring both my grandmother's memory and my own worth. Whatever came next, I knew I could face it with the same strength grandmother had always seen in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. The 24 hours following the confrontation were eerily quiet. No angry phone calls, no text messages, no surprise visits. The silence was both a relief and unsettling. I half expected David to call my bluff, to dare me to follow through on my threats. Instead, there was nothing but silence. I spent the day putting my affairs in order, just in case. I consulted with an attorney of my own, not a family connection, but a friend of Maya's who specialized in whistleblower protections. I prepared packages of evidence ready to be sent to regulatory agencies, local news outlets, and environmental advocacy groups. If David forced my hand, I would be ready. The call came exactly 23 hours after my ultimatum. It was not David but Tyler who reached out first. "David wants to meet," he said without preamble. "Not at the house. Somewhere neutral. He's asked me to act as an intermediary." "Why you?" I asked, suspicious of any family member's involvement. "Because I've advised him that his options are limited and expensive," Tyler replied with surprising candor. "And because despite everything, I do have some loyalty to this family. I'd prefer to see this resolved without public scandal if possible." We agreed to meet at a private room in a downtown restaurant that evening. I brought Maya with me, both for moral support and as a witness. David arrived with Tyler and a man he introduced as James Winters, Meridian's chief legal counsel. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," David began, his tone professionally cordial as if we were discussing a routine business matter rather than family betrayal. "I've reviewed the materials you presented yesterday and consulted with our legal team." James Winters cleared his throat. "Before we proceed, I want to clarify that nothing said in this meeting constitutes an admission of wrongdoing by Meridian Pharmaceuticals or any of its executives." I nodded. "Understood. I'm not here to extract confessions, just to reach an agreement that respects my grandmother's wishes." David's jaw tightened at the mention of my grandmother, but he maintained his composure. "After careful consideration, I am prepared to meet your terms, with certain modifications." He slid a document across the table. It was a draft agreement stating that Meridian would abandon its development plans for my neighborhood and establish a $2 million community trust for neighborhood preservation and protection of elderly homeowners. In exchange, I would turn over all evidence of misconduct and sign a confidentiality agreement. "The house?" I asked, noticing its absence from the terms. "The house remains yours," David conceded. "Cassandra and I will be purchasing property in Cambridge for our primary residence." I read through the document carefully. "What about my parents' ultimatum? Where do they stand in all this?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "They're adjusting to the new reality. Dad is particularly stubborn, but Mom is beginning to recognize the damage their actions have caused. And Cassandra? I pressed. David's expression hardened. My wife is understandably upset. She feels betrayed by your grandmother's actions and your decision to use this information against her family. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. She feels betrayed? After conspiring behind grandmother's back and pressuring me to give up my home? Family dynamics are complicated, Tyler interjected diplomatically. The important thing is finding a path forward. After reviewing the agreement with Maya, who had a background in contract law, I suggested several amendments to strengthen the community trust provisions and ensure transparent oversight of its administration. To my surprise, David agreed to most of my proposed changes with minimal resistance. You understand that signing this doesn't magically repair what's been broken in our family, I said as we finalized the details. David's response was coolly pragmatic. Family relationships evolve. Some recover from conflict, others don't. My primary concern is protecting Meridian's interests and reputation. By the end of the meeting, we had an agreement that accomplished my core objectives. I kept the house, the neighborhood was protected from development, and a substantial community trust would be established. I would surrender the evidence once the trust was funded and operational. As we prepared to leave, Tyler pulled me aside. For what it's worth, I think grandmother would be proud. You stood your ground without burning everything to the ground. That remains to be seen, I replied. The real test will be what happens with the family from here. The days following the agreement brought a flurry of activity. Meridian announced a change to their expansion plans, citing community feedback as the reason for selecting an alternative location in an already commercially zoned area outside the city. Financial analysts praised the decision as socially responsible, and the company's stock actually rose slightly on the news. My parents' reaction was more complicated. My father maintained a rigid silence, unable to reconcile his ambitions for family advancement with the failure of their plans. My mother, however, reached out with a tentative olive branch. I've been thinking about what you said, she admitted during an awkward phone call. About choosing David's corporate interests over family loyalty. I didn't see it that way at the time, but looking back, I'm not proud of how we handled things. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was something, an acknowledgement, at least, that their actions had been hurtful and inappropriate. We agreed to meet for lunch the following week, a small step toward potential reconciliation. Cassandra was another matter entirely. Her response came in the form of a scathing email that accused me of destroying years of careful planning and using grandmother's misguided sentimentality to undermine the family's financial future. The email concluded with a declaration that she needed time and space before she could consider any form of relationship with me moving forward. The most unexpected development came from Tyler. Having witnessed the entire conflict from a unique position as both family member and legal advisor, he seemed to be undergoing a kind of professional and personal crisis. I've been thinking about my practice, he confessed during a coffee meeting 2 weeks after the agreement. About the kinds of clients I represent and the work I do. I'm not sure I'm on the right path. What would the right path look like? I asked, surprised by this vulnerability from my usually composed brother. I don't know exactly. Maybe more pro bono work. Maybe focusing on environmental law from the advocacy side rather than the corporate side. He smiled ruefully. Grandmother always said I had a social conscience buried under all that Harvard training. Maybe she was right. As promised, the community trust was established with $2 million in funding from Meridian. I was asked to serve on its board of directors alongside several respected community leaders and urban planning experts. Our first initiative was to provide home repair grants to elderly residents who had been targeted by developers, helping them remain in their homes and maintain the neighborhood's character. Throughout this period of intense activity and emotional processing, I found solace in my grandmother's garden. Working with my hands in the soil she had tended for decades gave me a sense of connection to her wisdom and strength. I could almost hear her voice in the rustle of leaves, encouraging me to stand firm in my convictions while remaining open to healing and growth. One evening, as I was deadheading roses at sunset, I received an unexpected visitor. It was James Winters, Meridian's legal counsel, looking decidedly less corporate in casual clothes. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," he said, standing awkwardly at the garden gate. "I was in the neighborhood and wanted to drop off these documents personally." He handed me a folder containing the final paperwork for the community trust. "You could have sent these by courier," I observed, curious about his real motivation. James hesitated, then admitted, "I wanted to see the house that caused such a corporate upheaval. And perhaps to better understand the woman who stood up to one of Boston's most powerful executives." I invited him in for tea, and we sat in the garden talking as twilight deepened around us. To my surprise, James revealed that he had grown up in a neighborhood similar to mine, one that had been destroyed by corporate development in the 1990s. "What you did, preserving this community, matters more than you might realize," he said. "These old neighborhoods have a soul that can't be replicated in luxury condos and corporate campuses." As he was leaving, he paused at the gate. "You should know that your stand against Meridian has had ripple effects. The board is reviewing all current development projects with a new emphasis on community impact and ethical acquisition practices. It's not a revolution, but it's a start." That night, I wrote a long entry in my own journal, a practice I had adopted in honor of my grandmother. I reflected on how a house, just wood and stone and memories, had become the catalyst for exposing long-buried family dynamics and corporate ethics violations. How standing firm in my own truth, despite enormous pressure to capitulate, had ultimately created positive change beyond what I could have imagined. I was under no illusion that the journey ahead would be easy. Family wounds heal slowly, if at all. But for the first time since receiving that devastating ultimatum from my parents, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future, my future, on my own terms, in the home my grandmother had entrusted to me. As summer turned to autumn, the initial shock waves of the confrontation gradually settled into a new family reality. The path to reconciliation proved to be neither straight nor easy, but small steps forward began to accumulate like fallen leaves in the garden. My weekly lunches with my mother evolved from stilted exchanges to more genuine conversations. She never offered a direct apology for the ultimatum, but she began to share stories about her own complicated relationship with my grandmother, revealing layers of family history I had never known. "Your grandmother and I disagreed fundamentally about what constituted success," she explained during one particularly candid lunch. "I grew up with financial insecurity, and I married your father partly because his career promised stability. I pushed all of you children toward lucrative professions for the same reason, fear. And when grandmother left me the house instead of Cassandra?" I asked. My mother sighed. "It felt like a judgment on my values, on the choices I'd made for our family. I reacted badly, I know that now." These glimpses into my mother's inner world didn't excuse her actions, but they helped me understand her motivations beyond simple greed or favoritism. The same fear that had driven her to push her children toward financial security had made David's offer of stock options irresistible, a chance to ensure family prosperity for generations. My father remained more distant, unable or unwilling to engage in such reflection. When he did join our lunches, he kept the conversation focused on safe topics, my teaching work, neighborhood events, neutral family news. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was a kind of truce, and for now, that was enough. Tyler's self-described professional crisis continued to deepen. By mid-October, he had made the surprising decision to leave his corporate law firm and accept a position with an environmental justice organization that specialized in fighting predatory development in vulnerable communities. "I'll be taking a significant pay cut," he admitted over dinner at my house. "But for the first time in years, I'm excited about my work. I feel like I'm using my legal training for something meaningful." I was genuinely happy for him, and we began to rebuild a relationship that had been strained by competition and different values for most of our adult lives. Tyler started offering pro bono legal advice to the community trust, helping elderly homeowners navigate complicated property issues and ensuring their interests were protected. Cassandra's estrangement continued through the fall. Her silence was painful but not surprising. Of all my family members, she had been most invested in David's plans, most convinced of her entitlement to grandmother's house, and most humiliated by the outcome. According to my mother, she and David were moving forward with plans for their Cambridge home, and she had thrown herself into redesigning it with the same energy she had once directed toward imaginary renovations of my house. The most profound transformations, however, were happening within me. Standing up to my family had awakened a confidence and clarity I hadn't known I possessed. This newfound strength began to manifest in other areas of my life, particularly my career. For years, I had been content in my role as an elementary school art teacher, finding joy in nurturing children's creativity but never pushing for advancement or recognition. Now, inspired by the success of the Community Trust's initiatives, I began to develop an arts outreach program for elderly residents in the neighborhood. What started as simple art classes in my grandmother's garden grew into a community-wide effort. I secured a small grant from the trust to expand the program, partnering with local artists to offer workshops in various media. Participants created a collaborative mural for the neighborhood community center, telling the story of the area's history and cultural significance. The program received local media attention, bringing positive publicity to both the community trust and my school. My principal, Sarah Martinez, was delighted by the initiative. "This is exactly the kind of community engagement we want to showcase," she told me during our fall review. "I'd like you to consider taking on a formal leadership role as our arts integration coordinator. It would mean developing curriculum that incorporates arts education across subject areas, mentoring other teachers, and expanding programs like your seniors initiative." The position came with a significant raise and reduced classroom hours to accommodate the new responsibilities. The old Rebecca might have hesitated, doubtful of her qualifications for a leadership role. The new Rebecca accepted without hesitation. When I shared the news with Tyler during one of our now regular dinners, he raised his glass in a toast. "To grandmother," he said. "She always saw this version of you, even when you couldn't see it yourself." "To grandmother," I agreed, feeling a bittersweet pang of grief and gratitude. "I wish she could see all of this." "I think she orchestrated it," Tyler mused. "Not the specifics, but the chain of events. She knew exactly what she was doing when she left you the house, and that evidence. She was playing chess while the rest of us were playing checkers." The thought made me smile. My grandmother had indeed been several steps ahead, anticipating both the family's pressure and my eventual resistance. What she perhaps hadn't foreseen was how her final act of love would transform not just my circumstances but my entire sense of self. As the holidays approached, the question of family gatherings loomed large. Traditionally, we had always celebrated Thanksgiving and Christmas at my parents' suburban home, with attendance viewed as mandatory regardless of interpersonal tensions. This year, with the family fractured by recent events, no one seemed eager to address the elephant in the room. Finally, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I decided to take the initiative. I invited my parents, Tyler, and, with more hope than expectation, Cassandra and David to Thanksgiving dinner at my house. "No pressure, no ultimatums," I wrote in the invitation. "Just an open door if you'd like to share a meal together." My mother accepted immediately, sounding relieved that someone had broken the ice. Tyler not only agreed to come but offered to handle the cooking, a surprising development from my takeout-dependent brother. My father gave a non-committal response that my mother assured me meant yes. From Cassandra and David, there was only silence. I proceeded with preparations, determined to make the gathering meaningful regardless of who attended. I transformed the formal dining room into a warm, welcoming space, replacing my grandmother's antique china with more casual settings, adding extra candles and simple fall decorations. In the center of the table, I placed a small gratitude journal for each expected guest, a new tradition I hoped to establish. The morning of Thanksgiving brought an unexpected message from Cassandra: "We'll stop by briefly for dessert. David has a prior commitment for dinner." It wasn't a full acceptance, but it was more than I had expected, a tiny crack in the wall of her resentment. That evening, as Tyler orchestrated an impressive feast and my parents made awkward but genuine efforts at normal conversation, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for this imperfect beginning. We were not healed, not fully reconciled, but we were finding our way toward a new kind of family relationship, one based on honest communication rather than performance and expectation. When Cassandra and David arrived for dessert, the initial moments were tense. Cassandra's greeting was stiff, her eyes taking in the changes I'd made to grandmother's house with barely concealed criticism. David maintained his corporate facade, polite but distant. As we settled around the table with pie and coffee, I proposed a simple toast, to new beginnings and open doors. It wasn't particularly profound, but it acknowledged both the rift and the possibility of healing without demanding false harmony. To my surprise, it was David who responded first. "To new directions," he added, raising his coffee cup. "Sometimes the most valuable business lessons come from unexpected sources." His words were cryptic, but his tone lacked the bitterness I had expected. Later, as guests were preparing to leave, he pulled me aside for a private word. "The community trust is doing good work," he said, his expression serious. "I've been following its progress. The board at Meridian has taken note as well. We're implementing new protocols for community engagement in all our development projects moving forward." It wasn't an apology, but coming from David, it was a significant acknowledgement. The confrontation had changed something fundamental in his approach to business, perhaps even in his understanding of corporate responsibility. As I closed the door behind the last guest that night, I felt a sense of closure and new beginning intermingled. The house that had been the center of so much conflict was now becoming a place of healing, not just for my family, but for the wider community through the arts program and trust initiatives. Later that evening, I sat in my grandmother's favorite chair by the fireplace, reflecting on the journey of the past months. From the moment I had received that devastating ultimatum to this Thanksgiving gathering, I had traversed an emotional landscape I never expected to navigate. I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed, built new relationships while renegotiating old ones, and found my voice in ways that had transformed my professional life. The house around me was more truly mine now, bearing subtle touches of my own style while honoring my grandmother's essence. It was no longer just an inheritance to be defended but a home that reflected my evolving identity, a woman who could stand firm in her boundaries while keeping her heart open to possibility. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting the garden where my grandmother's carefully tended perennials slept beneath the soil, waiting for spring's renewal. I thought of her final journal entry, the one where she expressed her trust in my strength and her hope for my future. "Rebecca has more strength than they recognize," she had written. How right she had been, about my family, about me, about everything. As the snow continued to fall, transforming the familiar landscape into something new and beautiful, I felt my grandmother's presence more strongly than I had since her passing. Not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as a continuous thread of wisdom and love woven through my life, strengthening me for whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. Spring arrived with a burst of renewal, both in my grandmother's garden and in my life. The daffodils and tulips she had planted decades ago pushed through the soil in vibrant displays, a living legacy that continued to flourish under my care. Similarly, the seeds of change planted during the confrontation months earlier were now blooming in unexpected ways. The Community Trust had become a model program, attracting attention from urban planners and community advocates across the region. Our initiatives had expanded beyond home repair grants to include legal assistance for elderly residents facing predatory contracts, a community garden project that transformed vacant lots into productive spaces, and educational workshops on property rights and estate planning. Tyler had fully embraced his new career in environmental justice law, bringing both his Harvard credentials and newly discovered passion to cases that protected vulnerable communities from the very practices he once facilitated. We had developed a closer relationship than we'd had since childhood, often collaborating on community trust projects that benefited from both his legal expertise and my connections with neighborhood residents. My professional transformation continued as well. The arts integration program I developed had been so successful that the school district asked me to create a training curriculum for teachers throughout the system. I now split my time between classroom teaching and professional development work, helping other educators incorporate creative expression into their subject areas. The position came with another promotion and the opportunity to present our model at educational conferences. My relationship with my parents had settled into a new pattern. Not the unconditional closeness I had once craved, but a more authentic connection based on who we actually were rather than who they had wanted me to be. My mother had become a regular visitor to my home, even occasionally participating in the seniors' art program. My father maintained a more formal relationship but had notably stopped making dismissive comments about my career choices, especially as my professional achievements became more visible. Cassandra remained the most distant family member, but even there, small shifts were occurring. After months of minimal contact, she had begun to include me in occasional family updates and had even sent a surprisingly thoughtful gift for my birthday, a set of professional quality watercolors that showed she had at least been paying attention to my artistic interests. The most unexpected development came from David. Following our Thanksgiving conversation, he had indeed implemented new community engagement protocols at Meridian. In March, he invited me to speak to the company's executive team about the community trust model and how corporations could work more ethically with established neighborhoods. Standing in Meridian's sleek conference room, addressing executives who once would have intimidated me, I felt the full measure of how far I had come. After my presentation, David acknowledged my contribution with genuine respect. Rebecca's experience has been invaluable in reshaping how we approach community development, he told his team. Sometimes the most effective business strategies come from listening to the voices we might otherwise overlook. It wasn't friendship, but it was a kind of professional reconciliation I would never have thought possible during those tense confrontational days. David had found a way to incorporate the lessons of our conflict into his business model without losing face, an elegant solution that satisfied his pragmatic nature while creating real positive change. 1 year after the ultimatum that had changed everything, I hosted a garden party to celebrate both the anniversary of the community trust and the completion of my grandmother's garden restoration project. The guest list included trust board members, participants from the seniors' art program, colleagues from school, and, significantly, all members of my family. The garden was in full bloom, a riot of colors and scents that seemed to embody my grandmother's vibrant spirit. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees as dusk fell, and conversations flowed among the diverse groups of guests. My mother helped serve refreshments, Tyler charmed the elderly artists with genuine interest in their work, and even my father engaged in conversation with several trust board members about community investment strategies. Cassandra and David arrived late but made an effort to circulate and converse politely. At one point, I found Cassandra alone by the rose garden, studying a particularly magnificent bloom. "Grandmother's favorite variety," I commented, joining her. "Bristol Sunset. She always said they were stubborn but worth the effort." Cassandra smiled slightly. "She used to say the same thing about you." After a pause, she added, "She was right." It wasn't an effusive reconciliation, but in our family's economy of emotion, it was significant, an acknowledgement of both my grandmother's wisdom and my own value. We stood together in companionable silence for a moment, letting the simple truth of our shared history exist without embellishment or argument. Later, as guests began to depart, Tyler raised a toast to the trust's accomplishments and my leadership. To Rebecca, he said, who showed us all that standing firm for what's right can transform not just a neighborhood but an entire perspective. As applause rippled through the garden, I felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with my grandmother's legacy had expanded to include new purpose, new relationships, and a new understanding of my own capabilities. The house that had been the center of so much conflict had become something more important. A home base from which positive change radiated outward. That night, after all the guests had gone, I sat alone in the garden under the stars, reflecting on the journey of the past year. The ultimatum that had once seemed like the end of my family relationships had instead become the beginning of a more authentic connection with both my relatives and myself. By refusing to be manipulated or undervalued, I had created space for genuine growth and mutual respect. My grandmother's journal sat open on my lap, turned to her final entry about my strength and the protection she had left me. She had known exactly what I would need, not just the evidence to defend my inheritance, but the catalyst to discover my own voice and power. Her final gift had not been the house itself but the opportunity to become the person she had always seen in me. As a gentle breeze stirred the garden, carrying the scent of roses and night-blooming jasmine, I felt a profound sense of peace. The house was where I belonged, not because it had been given to me, but because I had earned it through standing firm in my truth. The family conflicts that had once seemed all-consuming had transformed into a new equilibrium based on authentic acceptance rather than performance and pretense. I closed my grandmother's journal and opened my own, ready to write the next chapter of this ongoing story, not just of a house saved or a family reconfigured, but of a woman who had found her voice and was using it to create positive change in ever-widening circles. In the quiet of the garden, surrounded by the beauty my grandmother had created and I had preserved, I wrote the truth I had discovered through this journey. Sometimes the greatest act of family loyalty is standing firm in your own worth, even when those who should support you try to diminish it. And sometimes, through that difficult stand, you create the possibility for something more authentic and meaningful to grow in its place. Wow, what a journey this has been to share with you all. If you've connected with my story of standing up for myself against family pressure, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family karma or justice in the comments below. Has there been a time when you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing in your truth? Your stories help remind all of us that we're not alone in these difficult family situations. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it too. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and finding your voice. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to stand firm in their boundaries, even when family is involved. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Remember that sometimes the most powerful life lessons come from those moments when we're forced to stand our ground. Until next time, may you find the courage to honor your own worth, just as my grandmother always believed I would.